All right, here we are. It's the Stageable State of the Stage podcast. My name is Benjamin Reed. I am the founder of Stageable.com, and we're here to discuss the performing arts and finding a sustainable future in the digital era. And I'm joined by Amelia Fischer. Amelia, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me on, Ben.
Oh, I'm thrilled to have you. I haven't seen you in quite some time. And unfortunately, it's through a screen. I would much rather it be in person, as most things are better in person. But this is definitely better than nothing. So thank you for being on. And I am familiar with you, but the people who are tuning in may not be familiar with you. So I was hoping you could just give a little introduction about who you are and where you're from and what you've been up to in your career so far.
So I'm Amelia Fischer, and I'm the artistic director of the newly minted North Georgia Shakespeare, which is a theater company dedicated to providing immersive and inclusive events to try to connect with our audiences here in North Georgia, sort of in that north of Atlanta area. I grew up in a trunk, as they say. My parents are both in theater, so I had a great inundation into this industry from a young age and have sort of been watching that evolution happen throughout. I, went to college for acting and then grad school also for acting, but it gave me this great vocabulary for directing and fight directing and intimacy directing. So I was able to sort of become a multi-hyphenate artist. And that's the lens through which I've seen my last 7 years of my career has been that shift from acting into more producing and arts management and directing. So that's been my journey. And geographically, that has looked like going to school in South Carolina, then going to grad school in Texas, then working without a home, really just bouncing around to different theater companies from Washington, D.C. to Washington State, and eventually winding up based out of Atlanta, which was a choice that I'm really happy with because of our thriving arts community here.
Oh, very cool. That is awesome. And newly minted, we're talking very new, right?
Yes, like we filed for our LLC status on January 1st, but we do have a production history because my business partner, Dean Kutras, has been producing this series of immersive and engaging sort of enhanced readings at this alley stage venue in Marietta, Georgia over the past year. So we've been working up to this official status, and it's wonderful to be here now.
That is awesome. Congratulations.
Thank you.
So we're both starting new ventures in 2025. It's a good year, considering the roundness of that figure, right? We're starting a new era in 2025. So tell me a little bit more about the business structure. This is what I was super interested to learn about, is kind of what your plan is. You said you formed an LLC. So tell me more about kind of how you guys are structuring it from a business perspective.
Yes. So we have some overlapping skills. Dean Kutras and we both went to grad school for theater and have experience directing in more traditional theater settings as well as in outdoor venues. And we were both interested in what is a financially stable way to create theater in 2025 and onward. And this has been a question that I've been grappling with for a long time as I looked at my parents both running theater companies and then worked on staff for several theater companies in different states, and trying to figure out what is that business model that is not the constant churn and burn of trying to keep the overhead as minimal as possible while still having to supplement so heavily with individual donors. And so we were having that conversation over at several points over the past year, and Dean went to school on the business finance side for his undergrad, and he has a day job of he's our tax guy. So it's wonderful to have someone with the financial experience and accountability as he's our producing director right now, and having that partnership go in with shared values of financial stability and looking to produce. And in new venues and look for different ways to engage audiences. I'd say our main audience right now is between 30 and like 55, and that's who we've been selling out to in this venue in Marietta. So we're really committed to how can we maintain the social aspect? How can we maintain the other elements that enhance an evening out for that Gen Z millennial crowd of food and drink and being able to hang out with the people who you scheduled this night with in the first place? And so we've been doing different cuts of Shakespeare's plays with this enhanced stage reading series that involve some irreverence. They involve drinking games. They involve getting the audience up for certain points, depending on the show. They involve swag that allows the audience to participate, like masks. If we're doing one that has a masked ball, they get to participate in that. So looking for different ways to activate these plays that share so much heart and courage and compassion, which are all things that we need right now, in a format that feels engaging and like the audience and our community can share ownership of that.
That's so great. You're speaking my language, all of the buzzwords to me that are like super exciting, which is, engaging with a community and inviting them in and taking care of all of the other elements surrounding the night. So it's not just the performance itself, but it's the entire experience. This stuff all really, really excites me. Not to mention, I mean, I share that exact interest with you of like, how do we make this financially viable, sustainable, exciting, dare I even say profitable? What do you think? Are you guys going to be non-profit or are you going to go for profit?
We're still having those discussions in terms of the long-term future based on whether we will eventually go to a 501c3 or not. But the LLC was created with the intention of us doing project-to-project planning, so that it's much more like how, the EU handles theater, where you basically have like artistic director for hire and you're producing plays as you go along. We are definitely looking to not bog ourselves down with a space right now, because we also want to help communities in North Georgia activate the spaces they already have. So we're looking to create partnerships with some of the historic homes here and produce something that feels a little bit, like Sleep No More is what we think of when we think of immersive theater in the US. So if you take Hamlet and we have staged different interactive scenes and whatnot, you also have food and drinks being passed. You also a few other elements to make that a whole night that people our age are excited to get out and experience. Then we can help communities activate what their taxpayers are already paying to maintain, or businesses like restaurants and comedy clubs and whatnot who are looking to engage with different audiences. And we don't have to feel so isolated in trying to make art happen in its own little silo. We can help it, populate a different area of these downtowns with more people.
That's so cool. And such, I feel like that's such forward thinking on your part. And it feels like, well, so that leads me to ask you about, you are a seasoned and active member of the performing arts community, and you have been in it for a while now. And I'm curious to hear kind of how you think it's going and what's the state of the stage at the moment here. I'm thinking about like from post-COVID recovery-ish, to present time, like how we doing?
How are we doing? I'm going to preface this by saying that when I was full-time staff with different companies in Atlanta and Tennessee or places, it's been a couple years since I've had that actual ticket revenue data. However, from going to see a lot of theater and from talking with my friends who are still on those staffs, it's just a time of evolution. And we are struggling as a theater industry to connect to the next generation of theater goers, because the wonderful audiences who have sustained the American theater for the past 50 years were raised very differently than how this audience has been raised. They were raised, as you all chatted with Patrick on your first episode, they were raised with a few less choices of entertainment and more of a sense of civic hometown responsibility to go support the arts. Like that's what you did if you were an upstanding member of the communities, whatever community you were in. And there were more options for accessible theater back then. I think that right now traditional theaters are faced with a hard choice of having to find new revenue streams to continue to supplement the model that they have, which some are doing successfully by continuing to engage with new education initiatives or to expand their reach that way. The Alliance is expanding into various other suburban communities with their summer camps and whatnot here. I think that the other way is becoming a luxury item, and you could argue that that has already become the case. But by raising ticket prices, raising production quality, and trying to engage with people who do have that disposable income at that level to try to make ticket sales a bigger part of their financial planning, I feel that is alienating our hope of creating strong connections with this younger generation, or at least the majority of them. Because you are a father, I am a mother. I only have so many dollars that need to cover dinner, entertainment, and childcare at this stage in our lives. And I'm in a privileged situation. I'm not, struggling. So I just think that if we are going to engage people, it's hard to do that at a $60 to $70 ticket price and then pay for parking and then pay for childcare. And then that doesn't include any food or drinks. So I think it's a hard time for theaters to have to choose one of those. But I also think that I'm going to be audacious and say that there is a great sense of hope and renewal here for how we structure our events and what those new forms take that still include a high quality level of live performance and storytelling that sparks empathy, which is something our whole community needs, regardless of where you fall on political sides or religious or race. We just need empathy and compassion for each other. And we need to spend some time in the same room just enjoying a story about humanity. So I think that that means that there is a need for this, and there is an eternal need for us to be social. So how do we blend those elements in a way that connects to our audience, is accessible to the audience that we need to develop, or in 30 years, we aren't going to have that, except for the 1% of people who can afford to do the luxury path.
Yeah, that's the big fear of mine, is that the smaller arts organizations and artists are going to go away, and it's going to be a very small portion of very well funded and well paid artists who get to do the work, and everyone else is going to have to figure out a different career or do it as a hobby, or find some other way to subsidize their art. And as you know from taking care of a family, that can be difficult to do, and it can force you out of the performing arts game entirely. And I think while not everyone can be Taylor Swift, not everyone can be on Broadway, not everyone has the family life to live in New York City, but that doesn't mean that their performances aren't valuable. And I feel like that is kind of the thing that's on the table, is that those could potentially go away. Do you think that's a accurate read of things, or?
Because we have to figure out how to share funding if we're going to continue to look at those traditional models of funding for the arts, which I was around post-recession when suddenly theater companies were having to shift from a lot of corporate donations and sponsorships that then went away. So they had to go pivot and find more individual donors to make up that portion of how do we continue to produce at this level funding. So I'm looking for what is that next sustainable model. And I think the younger companies, the newer companies are at a really a potential filled place of you haven't committed to some of the overhead that the larger companies have. You want to move forward in a way, and we are looking at when we get to producing these larger experiences, how are we prioritizing paying our artists? How are we engaging artists who live in the area that we're trying to connect with communities so that you do start building those relationships that you're talking about of, you want some actor name recognition to help market it at some point, but I want to build that locally. And so I think that it is just it's a tricky situation based on how theater has been created for the past 100 years in this country. And I'm hopeful that this is a pivot point where we can be a little scrappy about it and find new ways of creating live theater and new ways of partnering with local communities, because there are other sources of funding when you start talking about the city of Roswell or the city of Marietta or the city of, so they're looking for ways to promote their residents as a great place for families to move or for new businesses to engage. And the more we can partner with those cities who are looking for moving away from national touring arts performances, like they no longer want to spend the big bucks to bring in 2 singers and then have to hire a whole band. They're looking for how can we partner with local arts producers so that we are saving some money on those bigger tours, but getting more bang for our buck. And some of them have access to rehearsal spaces, which is a great way to coexist together and hopefully serve their needs as a space that needs to be programmed, and also serve our needs as artists who need to be a little bit peripatetic and are looking for those different places to thrive.
Right. Like, it feels like there's more resources out there than we really give ourselves credit to accessing. It's like they've been there kind of all along, and it's going to take our creativity to tap into those resources and utilize them to their full extent. And I love that thought.
Yeah, I think it does take that creativity, and the ability to invest time in those relationships and listen to their needs as the city or as the community or as, a good apartment complex or condo building that is also looking for monthly programming. How can we take a more flexible performance model of, 8 actors that go in with a cut and activate their community spaces? And if we're able to book 8 of those, then it's a good amount of performance money for the actors that are involved.
Cool. Yeah. The thing for me that gets me excited about what you're saying is the connecting in and building community. And I feel like that personal touch is the thing that's going to set companies apart as we move forward. I do feel like what you said is true, which is that we are kind of at a precipice. Things are going to go one way or they're going to go the other. And I think that people who can figure out how to listen to their local community, or it doesn't even have to be local, if you figure out how to connect with people via digital medium, but you stop trying to pitch to the entire world and start trying to pitch to the people who are your people, who like the way that you do things and the way that you approach things.
Yes. And I think that there are other untapped groups of people that we don't think of as traditional theater goers who are looking for that fun night out with their friends, or they're looking for how can they have that moment of escapism. I think I'm fascinated by the rise of fantasy balls and these other events. Dragon Con has always been around, but these groups of non-theater people who are drawn to that idea of what is an elevated experience for me and my friends to embrace our joy and be seen for who we want to express ourselves as. So looking for how do we invite people into a space that feels like that, rather than a space that feels like you need to sit in an anonymous horde, right? And watch us
Right.
for 2.5 hours. Um, just because that's the niche that we're looking to fill here. I think that traditional theaters here are doing a great job of figuring out how do they protect and uplift their artist communities while also providing high quality theater that pushes some narratives in the community. One example is the Alliance Theater recently created a free childcare program for artists during rehearsals,
Mm,
which is just amazing.
that's
So
awesome.
I think that there's a great sense of synergy here from the theater companies, the artists, and their theater support, longtime theater supporters. I think we're just looking to bridge that into those new audiences.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that if we as an artistic community focus on the audience and focus on what their needs are, what their interests are, what they, like what would make them the happiest from a night out, and whether that's, I mean, you said childcare for the actors, which is incredible, but what about childcare for, people attending the play? I mean, what if that could be, even if it was
Right.
on Saturday matinee and that's it, but you have a room dedicated to that
Yeah.
and staff it, and you take that kind of burden off of people, and they know, oh, now I can engage without having to schedule a sitter. I think that
I
kind of
know that's the
thinking
dream, right?
it could change everything. I mean, I really do think it could.
Yeah, and I think theaters have explored that. My business partner would say the insurance implications of that are very challenging.
Yes,
But
yeah,
I
I can
think that there's
understand that.
ways to partner with organizations that are already providing parents' night out and just partner with those groups that already have the licensing and already have the insurance so that you could be doing an event that is in a space adjacent to that and have partnered with the uh, child care or child enrichment company that needs to connect with new people as well. So, yeah, looking for that way of how do we help our community through this tough time, which is not just tough for theater. It's tough for restaurants. Um, it's tough for city governments who are looking at cuts in funding. It's tough for a lot of people right now, and we aren't as a human race, we're not going to lose the need for storytelling and for social engagement. So I don't feel like theater is going away. I just think this is a time of creating new lines of communication and new expectations for what that event is.
So I'm curious, have you been a part of anything that has been captured via, cameras or audio and then redistributed, or any kind of live digital performance? And if so, what was that experience like? Good, bad, or indifferent?
As a director, I've worked at Houston Shakespeare Festival, and the two shows I directed there different years were both live streamed. And I got to watch them then with my family from my home back in Georgia after I had left the show. So I loved the experience, and I think they did a great job. And I haven't gotten to engage with a lot of other things besides you've talked about the National Theater Live, but I haven't looked out there for what other smaller companies are able to do this. But the Houston Shakespeare, the people at the Miller Outdoor who are streaming those productions, not just of the Shakespeare Festival, but of all of their content year round, have just done a really great job of figuring out probably the minimum number of cameras and the minimum number of time that they have to invest to make that an engaging and fun experience for people at home. One of the things I love about when a theater event is live streamed is the shots of the audience and the environment. And so being able to see those panning shots of how many people are there, getting to hear the audience is something that doesn't always get accomplished in smaller live streams. And I think it's a really pivotal part to enjoying something as a community. I also think that, yeah, seeing people picnicking out on the lawn during intermission lets you feel like you have a strong sense for what that event is. And it also creates that hunger in you to be there. I know it was hard for a lot of theaters at first to think about, and our unions to think about, what are we losing by putting things on a streaming platform? What are the barriers we need to put up to safeguard that? And it's really similar to, a long time ago when people are having the same issue with streaming live sport, televising live sports, to televise or not to televise live sports, and how much that was going to kill ticket sales and how that was going to be a terrible experience and no one would want to watch it from home. It was all about being there. And obviously, it had the exact opposite effect. And it also created this sense of identity for people viewing at home to be able to build their relationship of watching and their knowledge of these athletes from their home. And then, they could decide if they wanted to, pool their resources, and their birthday trip was to go see their favorite sports team. And they weren't an outsider anymore. They were already an insider, although they had not been to that space before. And I think that's what live stream can create for live theater, as expanding your group of insiders who feel like they belong at that theater space.
Love that, because I love what you were referencing with the sports metaphor or analogy. What's the right terminology there?
Analogy.
Analogy, I think, is right.
My dad loves sports analogies. He used them all the time.
Well, it's so true, right? When we did live broadcast of sports, all of a sudden now you've got allegiances and communities, that have been built and become diehard, and now I'm able to connect. I'm a Steelers fan. I'm from Pittsburgh, born and bred, and I live in Virginia now, and I've found roots in that community, and just because I live in a different state now doesn't mean I can't participate. Doesn't mean that I wouldn't still travel back to Pittsburgh to see a game, or go to DC if they're playing in Washington and whatnot. And I think that same creation of community can happen in theater if we find ways to engage with audiences on their terms and on their timelines.
Well, because I think what you're talking about too is an engagement in the larger story of those players. If you only watched your team when they play in person, you're not going to know about the rookie who got drafted to wherever first, or how they then spent time over here honing their skills. And so that ability to engage with not just one brand, but others, regardless of location, I think is really an invitation to participate in these artist stories and the broader conversation of what stories do we want to be telling in America right now, in a way that I think the theater right now is fighting a reputation or a perception of elitism that is not how we feel as the artists on the ground trying to make things happen, or commissioning new plays or trying to reach out to new communities. But I think that is sometimes how theater is perceived because of the ticket prices, because of the history of production and who those audiences traditionally might have been in the 80s or something. We want to make sure that we're opening it up to the working parents, to the people who can only engage after all their kids have gone to bed, and they want to be able to tune in to see that theater performer who they saw live that one time, and now they love to see them do their Macbeth or their Hamlet or whatever it happens to be.
Yeah, I could absolutely see that as you were starting this company and you start to build your local community, and they're going to form connections, right, with the performers, and then if they happen to need to relocate, you can still engage with them and they can still feel like they're a part of it, and continue to see their favorite performers do some of their favorite roles. And I always think about a good friend of mine who was playing a role in, where was it? I think it was in Ohio. And he was playing Petruchio. And I was like, man, I love this guy. I love his work. And he's a good friend of mine. And I would love to see him play this role. But I've got 2 kids. I can't drive up to Ohio, get a hotel room, all that whole 9 yards. And it's like, man, if only there was a way that I could be included from where I am.
It's about inclusivity and accessibility. And I think we as an industry have to figure out the financially viable way to make that happen.
So is there an arts organization that you are like, they're crushing it?
I mean, there's so many arts organizations that I respect and admire for different areas in which I think they're crushing it. I think the alliances care for their artists and for creating a way to tell stories on a huge scale is amazing while still providing opportunities for local actors. Yeah, they're killing it. I think that companies I admire who have fewer resources currently, that are doing a great job. Yeah, I think that I would shout out Theatrical Outfit for centering a mix of classic stories and newer commissions. They're doing their launch pad this month in Atlanta. So it's all local theater artists who have either, written their own show, they're smaller teams working in a scrappy way to create an offering that elevates people who may not be able to produce things individually, and certainly not to the kind of reach that this larger theater has on their own. But because it's part of a festival, they get to do that. Similar to the Barter Theater, closer to where you are, doing their Appalachian Play Festival. I think that when bigger companies are able to offer that leg up to the younger or newer artists or people who are still trying to establish their voice and their connection, I think that's a wonderful thing. And as an industry, that's what sets us apart sometimes from what I perceive of the on-camera world, is that we are very generous and we are trying to be the grassroots version of art and how we tell stories in America. It's not, who's going to have the biggest profile on IMDb or who gets the best crafty snacks when they're in their trailer. I think that sense of helping elevate stories and connect new people is what theater's all about. And there are a lot of companies who are crushing it at that. They just need that little extra bit of amplification or ability to pivot in some of our funding and connection.
That's awesome. Well, great. Amelia, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. I think what you're doing at Stageable is a really important thing for this moment in time and to lead us into what the future looks like for live theater.